Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to Convocation at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Convocation is one of the most important and inspirational moments in our academic year. It is a celebration of new beginnings and all the possibilities that they offer. New scholarship and learning, new collaborations and partnerships, and new friendships. Convocation is a time to give thanks for all that we have, the precious gift of community, of a safe space to challenge assumptions and for respectful inquiry, a place for students to ready themselves for leadership challenges ahead in a complex world, and for the better world that we all hope to build together. To our returning Januarians and second year students, welcome home. To our new class, welcome to your new home. You join a school proud of its legacy over 89 years and confident in the future. This year's accomplishments and endeavor, from the small beginnings of insight or a fleeting interaction to the large works which will be published, will form another thread in the rich fabric of this community. In the wider society that we are part of, there is evidence of stress and strain in modern life. At Fletcher, we care for each other and for ourselves. This stretches from the classroom, where all sides of an issue can and should be openly debated respectfully, and where you and all of us have an obligation as individuals committed to peace and justice to confront our own assumptions and biases. This caring continues to the corridors and the way that we engage with each other, support each other, celebrate each other. And it extends to the way that we run the school, who teaches what, to whom, and who works here. As part of Tufts University's commitment to being an anti-racist institution, we have an opportunity this year as we plan for our 90th anniversary next year to explore our histories and stories and every thread of this rich fabric. The faculty and staff have worked very hard over the summer to be ready for this year, and I am grateful to them and excited at the prospect of what we will achieve together. There is so much going on at the school that it's impossible for me to mention all of it in my short remarks today. We have many new members of the faculty bringing new perspectives, expertise, and experience to the school, layering up richness upon the extraordinary faculty that we already have. We will be running searches this academic year, additionally, for professors in negotiation and conflict resolution, business and economic law, economics, Northeast Asia studies, security studies. And I'm delighted that Fletcher will recruit a university endowed professor in global One Health diplomacy. The Fletcher Forum, the school's student-led Journal of International Relations, was expertly led last year by a dedicated team who undertook important updates and editorial renovation. I'm looking forward this year to seeing Fletcher Forum delivering a range of content across its print and media platforms, and I look forward to seeing many of you contributing to its blog. So as I travel around the country and the world, meeting alumni and strengthening our partnerships, people always come up to me to tell me how proud they are of their association with Fletcher when they read a syndicated column by a Fletcher professor, or walk into a bookstore and the first book they see on the table is from a Fletcher professor or alum, or when they turn on the radio or television and listen to a podcast and can hear the Fletcher School interpreting current events, interpreting history, and dissecting future trends. Extending our community beyond these four walls has become our routine, in part under the pressure of the pandemic isolation. But I look forward to continuing to upgrade the audiovisual capability in these buildings so that we have greater capacity to teach and interact remotely when we have to or want to, and so that we can capture and share events and important discussions that go on here with our alumni and the wider world. We have, over the summer, begun to roll out the significant infrastructure upgrade and investment in our website, to ensure that we can project a global digital presence, essential for student and faculty recruitment, alumni engagement, and our ability to shape global affairs. That powerful computer in your hand, hopefully on airplane mode at the moment, is the way that you search and is the way that we do most things these days. Our web infrastructure now allows us to be present on that small device without hitch. And with a new visual identity, we can project with confidence your work, your accomplishments, and underline that this is the place that generations of world leaders will come behind you, following in your stead. I've talked about the importance of this community, but we don't live in a bubble. And as we look out from Medford, we can see a damaged and uncertain world. The Eurobond markets show more and more countries pricing their bonds at default. The Fed and the ECB seem committed to successive interest rate hikes, squeezing already stressed emerging markets. It's unclear how much the IMF can or will help and how China will respond. Urgent climate mitigation may drop down the list of priorities for many governments, faced with the triple whammy of food, finance, and fuel crises. But the urgent need for investment in climate adaptation cannot drop down that list, as we watch breathtaking images of flooded Pakistan and famine across the Horn of Africa. More and more people are displaced through conflict and the impacts of climate change. We welcome to Fletcher this year a number of scholars at risk. Within the ranks of our administration, we've also been able to employ and welcome scholars too. From Ukraine and Russia and Afghanistan, our community is pleased to flex, to offer security and community to these scholars. There seems to be no early end to the war in Ukraine's soil, and Afghanistan's government has turned back the pages of progress again for its women and girls. But sitting here on the eastern seaboard of the United States, it must be with a sense of humility that we analyze and seek to shape the world. International law has always been at the heart of Fletcher's understanding of global affairs, and we will soon award a prize in the name of one of the great law professors of Fletcher's past. But international law can never be taken for granted, as we have seen in the UK's move away from international law and the rights of refugees, Russia's casting aside of laws on international borders and territorial integrity, or flagrant violation of the laws of war in multiple conflicts around the world, China's treatment of minorities, or here in the United States, rolling back decades of progress in women's reproductive and sexual health and rights, and the mass incarceration of minorities. Countries that form the central pillars of the United Nations, Security Council and around, their standing and their leadership is stained. The international community more broadly stumbled in its vaccine response to COVID and in support for the loss and damage faced by countries who did not cause the climate crisis. Trust in some quarters is at an all-time low since the beginning of the modern multilateral era. That trust will be essential as old alliances evolve and new ones take shape to tackle the new geopolitics of China's rivalry with the US, Russia's last imperial gasp, new maps of energy security, an era of pandemic, possible nuclear proliferation, and biodiversity loss with nature's feedback loops at dangerous tipping points. Business is increasingly a partner at the table in finding solutions to many of these challenges. Globally, it faces the uncertainty of some deglobalization or the greater changes in regulatory approaches between China, the EU, and the US. Conversations around the purpose of business and its role in society extend well beyond where current regulation and oversight reach. So we're operating in a world of hybrid governance, but also at a time of growing inequality and a potential great reversal. All of this and more is subject to research and learning here at Fletcher across our 11 fields of study. Therefore, what we do here must help build back trust and prepare us for a lifetime of practice of investing in that trust. We will, over the course of the year ahead, welcome many leading thinkers to campus, and I'm looking forward to our student-led conferences and to the Murrow Centre as it evolves with dynamic leadership from Tara Sonnenschein in exploring the practice of public diplomacy. All of this depends on a sure foundation. And over the last 2 years, the school's administration has been in dialogue with the university's leadership over the strengthening of the school's long-term position. This has resulted in significant investment in our marketing capability. I've referenced already the first phase of this in the overhaul of the website, but this has also resulted in an investment in executive education, a platform designed to offer curated content to government and private sector clients. The executive education platform is designed to generate revenue, which we can then plough back into the programs that you are all participating in. There is significant demand to access Fletcher's interdisciplinary take on the world as it moves fast forward, and for helping prepare diplomats, civil servants, business executives, and NGO leaders for that world. So I'm also pleased that this year we roll out a modernized and stronger GMAP degree, our mid-career hybrid program. It will have a schedule that better fits with our academic year, allowing for more interaction between GMAP students and the rest of you. And it will provide a strengthened and updated curriculum at a new price point, once again posing that program for growth. We've also, in the last year, undertaken a painstaking review of our Masters of International Business. I'm delighted that the outcome will see the MIB embrace the challenge of sustainability as the context of all business, and we will offer students the opportunity to examine in greater detail the E, the S, and the G of ESG, as the impact of business and its measurement face both demands from the left for less greenwash and from the right for an end to woke management. Just yesterday, I was talking to the head of sustainability for a major fund management firm in New York, who asked, only slightly jokingly and a little wistfully, if she could come to Fletcher at this torrid time. But perhaps even more importantly, we have finally found a way to offer a STEM track within the MIB, which has long been a demand of students, especially our international students. So as you can see, with just this brief and incomplete tour of the horizon, there is much at play at Fletcher, all of it focused on ensuring the excellence of the student experience, supporting the quality of teaching and scholarship, and ensuring our continued competitiveness. That this is the place that you should be able to come if you want to shape the world. And with our focus on commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. All I ask of you students in this room in return is that you use your time at Fletcher well to probe the depths of your determination, imagination, and courage, to take your knowledge and experience and apply it meaningfully. Succeeding here demands empathy and open-mindedness. Take advantage of all of that you find here and be prepared to shift your outlook. So let's turn to the prizes. The annual Rubin Prize is awarded to a deserving second-year student who, through their academic performance in international law, best exemplifies the tradition of excellence in scholarship that we associate with Professor Rubin. The prize is named after Professor Albert P. Rubin, who made a significant contribution as a prominent scholar and leading proponent of an approach that examines international law in our understanding of world politics and international relations, especially in an era of interdependence, globalization, and terrorism. To many, he was an adored teacher who educated many generations of Fletcher students and faculty. He taught them to think clearly, soberly about the structure and effects of international law. His impact continues to be felt at Fletcher, and this prize, made possible by the generous support of Professor Rubin's students and colleagues, honors his efforts and the efforts of the recipient. This year, the law faculty voted that Lauren McGowan be recipient of the prize. Lauren is a MOLD student. Her studies are focused on international negotiation, conflict resolution, and human rights, building on her extraordinary professional experience at Amnesty International and the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. She has also held research positions with Nonviolence International and Conflict Dynamics International, and was a consultant for the Women's March. Lauren has BAs in political science and Spanish from Rutgers. She is president of the International Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Club. Lauren, congratulations. Now we move to the presentation of the Stewart Prize. The Robert B. Stewart Prize is awarded annually to the student who, at the end of their first year, now the beginning of their second year, best exemplifies high academic achievement combined with participation in the activities of the school and promotion of its character as an academic. Dean Stewart was a member of the first class at Fletcher, enrolling in 1933. He went on to be a State Department official, working on British and British Commonwealth affairs from 1938 to 1945. He also attended the 1945 San Francisco Conference on the United Nations. He then came to Fletcher as Dean, a post he held until 1964, and he was named a Dean Emeritus upon his retirement in 1975. This year, the faculty voted to recognize Lily Hartzell as a recipient of the prize. Lily is a rising international energy policy expert, no pressure there, especially sitting next to Professor Gallagher. This summer, she interned at the US Department of Treasury. They actually called me to tell me how good she was, sorry. International Affairs Office of Climate and Environment. She's been a research assistant at the Cohen Group's China team. She's worked as a freelance journalist in China, and again in China, Lily was as a Princeton in Asia Environmental Law Fellow at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Lily received a BA from Tufts, just down the road. She's also editor-in-chief of the Fletcher Forum of World Affairs. Lily, congratulations. And now we move to the presentation of the Faculty Research Prize. Our faculty have long been noted for their impact, the impact of their research, and each year we recognize a member of the faculty for their outstanding scholarship. This decision is made by members of the Academic Council. I'm pleased to announce that this year the prize is awarded to two professors, Thomas Dannenbaum, Associate Professor of International Law, Christopher Miller, Associate Professor of International History. Professor Dannenbaum's important research has recently focused on the war crime of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare and on the legal and institutional implications of Russia's escalation of its invasion of Ukraine. His starvation articles covered both normative theory, arguing for a conceptualization of starvation methods as a societal form of torture, and legal interpretation, advocating a doctrinal focus on the act of deprivation rather than the weaponization of suffering as the central element of the crime. His writing on the war in Ukraine has covered issues relating to the crime of aggression, the rights of deserting troops, legitimacy in international criminal punishment, the conduct of hostilities in and around nuclear power plants, and siege starvation. Professor Dannenbaum received his BA from Stanford University, his JD from Yale Law School, and his PhD from Princeton. At Fletcher, Professor Dannenbaum teaches courses on international criminal justice, ethics in the practice of foreign affairs, and international humanitarian law. Professor Miller's recent research has included his most recent book, The Book Chip War, which I hope wins the FT award. I don't know when they're making the announcement. Is it next week? Or is it the week after? I've signed up for the reception in New York. I'm hoping it wins. The fight for the world's most critical technology. It is an epic account of the decades-long battle to control what has emerged as the world's most critical resource, microchip technology, with the United States and China increasingly in conflict. Microchips, Miller argues, are the new oil, the scarce resources on which the modern world depends. Today, military, economic, and geopolitical power is built on a foundation of computer chips. Virtually everything from missiles to microwaves, smartphones to the stock market runs on chips. Until recently, America designed and built the fastest chips and maintained its lead as the world's only superpower. Now, America's edge is slipping, undermined by competitors in Taiwan, Korea, Europe, and above all, China. Today, as Chip War reveals, China, which spends more money each year importing chips than it spends importing oil, is pouring billions into a chip building initiative to catch up with and presumably overtake the US. At stake is a big question for discussion here at Fletcher. Professor Miller received his BA from Harvard and his MA and PhD from Yale. At Fletcher, he teaches courses on US foreign policy, 1898 to the present, and on Russia-US relations and Russian foreign policy. He also anchors our relationship with the College of Europe and the Matter degree. Now, in a beautiful innovation, rather than separate acceptance speeches, Professors Dannenbaum and Miller have offered instead to be in conversation about the questions raised by the war in Ukraine in their respective fields. We are lucky to be able to listen into that. I'm sure this will provide much food for thought and stimulation at the advent of a new academic year, and provides an excellent example of the interdisciplinary collegiality that supports the school's research and teaching. So, Professors Dannenbaum and Miller, on behalf of the faculty, congratulations on receiving this year's Faculty Research Award. And now we're going to do a very delicate choreographed dance where I give each one of you the award in turn, and then the two of you will enter into conversation. So, Tom, please, first. Chris.
We stand here, or would you like us to highly choreographed here? I'll try not to obstruct anyone and distance conversation. So Dean Kite, first of all, thank you very much. It's a tremendous honor to receive this recognition from colleagues for whose work I have such immense respect. So thank you. You asked about the situation in Ukraine, and we thought in particular we'd think about the issues that we'll be looking at over the coming months and what they mean in our respective fields. So in my field, in international law and institutions, some of the issues I'll be thinking about are the crime of aggression and its enforcement, war crimes and crimes against humanity and their enforcement, and importantly, the relationship between the extraordinary attention that's being placed on accountability in the context of Ukraine and the disproportionately lacking attention to accountability in other contexts, Tigray, Yemen, and elsewhere. So when we're thinking about the crime of aggression, the initial challenge in the context of Ukraine is that the International Criminal Court does not have jurisdiction over that specific crime in this specific context. The crime of aggression is the crime of resorting to war without legal basis, the invasion itself. And it's also difficult to prosecute that crime in domestic courts. And yet this is the crime without which none of the atrocities that we're seeing in Ukraine would be occurring. It's also the only crime that captures the wrongfulness of the violence in its totality. And frankly, it's the crime which is most straightforwardly, legally attributable to Vladimir Putin and others in the leadership circle in Russia. So it's not surprising then that Ukraine has sought to mobilize international support for the creation of a special tribunal for the prosecution of the crime of aggression. That's facing various political challenges at this moment. If one is created, though, a number of questions will arise. Which states are involved in creating it? Which international organizations, if any? Are the states that are involved in creating it themselves committed materially to accountability for their own leaders when they commit crimes of aggression through the domestic criminalization of that act or through having ratified the Kampala amendments, the ICC statute? What's the posture of this tribunal going to be on issues of status immunities and functional immunities? What's its posture going to be on the issue of in absentia trials, something that are legally permissible in the Ukrainian system and that Ukrainian officials have advocated, but raise a number of questions at the international level? The answers to those questions will be critical to understanding the legitimacy, the authority, the impact, and the credibility of such a tribunal. Shifting to war crimes and crimes against humanity, the problems are, if anything, the reverse. It's not that we lack an institution that has jurisdiction over those crimes. We have a multiplicity of those institutions. And in fact, we have a dozen states in Europe engaged in investigation of war crimes in Ukraine, including, of course, the Ukrainian criminal justice system itself, in addition to the International Criminal Court. Now that raises questions of coordination, how these different actors are going to engage with one another, what they see their different roles as being. And it's particularly acute in the relationship between the ICC and domestic systems. The ICC is supposed to defer to domestic systems. But this has also been a situation that has reinvigorated the ICC in a moment of crisis, and which has been a situation in which the prosecutor has been very high profile in leading the investigation in Ukraine. So how exactly is that relationship going to be navigated? Is the ICC going to focus on specific kinds of perpetrators? For example, those with status immunities, where it has a comparative legal advantage, but on the other hand, those are the cases that are least likely to make progress in the short and medium term. Or is it going to focus on a particular kind of crime, maybe one where there can be a global precedential impact, such as the war crime of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, where there's a dearth of precedent? How exactly is that relationship going to be managed, and what are the priorities that are going to arise? And then finally, on this issue of the relationship to accountability efforts elsewhere. On the one hand, the attention on accountability in Ukraine, which has been extraordinary, could help to bolster accountability efforts elsewhere. I just mentioned one way in which that could happen through a global precedent on the war crime of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare. But on the other hand, it could draw away from, suck the oxygen out of accountability efforts in other contexts. And I'll be watching very closely to see in which conditions, in which contexts, which of those trends prevails. And at the International Criminal Court, a court that was in crisis a year ago and had been for a decade, is this a moment where it's actually going to be reinvigorated, not just at the crime scene in Ukraine, but in the courtroom? And in particular, I'll be watching in that respect the Kashaib case at the International Criminal Court, Abdul Rahman case, which is the first case implicating the genocide in Darfur with war crimes and crimes against humanity charged. Can this be an institution that can actually deal with state and state-affiliated actors successfully for the first time in its history, or will the record of failure continue, with implications, of course, for the credibility of international criminal justice? So those are some of the questions I'll be thinking about in the ensuing months.
Well, I must admit that when I listened to Dean Kite's speech at the outset, setting out the issues we had to deal with this year, he left me with a small amount of optimism, but all of the challenges that Dean Kite laid out tested my remaining optimism. I think reading the newspaper over the past 6 months, one of the few reassuring or useful aspects of it has been the ability to run experiments in real life. And of course, there are victims of these experiments who are the people who are suffering from them. But if there's anything we can do to stop experiments like these from being run in the future, it's to learn why they happen. And I think the Russia-Ukraine war has provided a test of our understanding of the way the world works in a number of different instances. One is how politics works inside of countries, and inside of Russia in particular, I think is a country that I've studied in great detail, but it probably has ramifications for other countries as well. And if you'd read a textbook on Russian politics 1 year ago, you would have read about different institutions, different groups making decisions, the contest between the military and the security services for power. You'd read about oligarchs. And it turns out that when the crucial decision of the last 30 years of Russian history was made, almost none of them mattered. None of the institutions mattered. There was a small group of 4 or 5 men, all of the same age, all but one from the Russian security services, from the same training and background. And these small number of individuals made a decision that will change the fate of their country for generations. So in some ways, this is a profound piece of evidence for the influence of individuals over international affairs. On the other hand, of course, it's not a coincidence that these 4 or 5 individuals found themselves at the top of Russian politics. And so you could also make an argument for the enduring impact of structure. It's not a coincidence that someone out of the KGB, for example, is ruling Russia today. Only people with that background could have had the institutional ability to bring together the Russian state when it was newly recreated out of the wreckage of the Soviet Union. So there's a fascinating political science experiment underway in a sort of a horrifying sense in front of our eyes right now. And the same, I think, is true on the battlefields of Ukraine, not only the military battlefields, but the broader political battlefield for what does the relationship between Russia and Ukraine look like? Where is the boundary between those two countries in the future, and who controls the territory of Ukraine? On the one hand, the last 6, almost 7 months now are a reminder of the enduring influence of hard power, of military force in international politics. And as I wrote in the New York Times the day after the invasion, there's no amount of soft power or economic influence that could have stopped Russian armor rolling towards Kiev. It was only the foolish errors of the Russian military plus Ukrainian artillery that was already arrayed outside of Kiev. On the other hand, if you ask yourself, what was the decisive turning point of the Russia-Ukraine war? It was clearly the first night of the war when Zelensky was able to broadcast to the world with his surrounded by his 4 closest advisors from the streets of Kiev, saying, we're still here, telling the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian military, the rest of the world, they're still here ready to fight. And that was made possible, not thanks to the Ukrainian military, but thanks to the fact that Ukraine's cell phone networks were still functioning. Sort of a shocking demonstration of the relevance of networks today. Why were they still functioning remains something of a mystery, I think. But the fact that they were was arguably the decisive feature of the war, because from that point onwards, Ukraine's government retained its functioning. Zelensky retained his control of the military with results that we're still seeing today. So here too, a fascinating case study in what is power on the international stage. Is power better defined by Ukrainian artillery formations outside of Kiev, or is power better defined on who controls Ukraine's ability, or who controls the cell phone networks in Ukraine? There are many other types of power you could look at being deployed in Ukraine: blockades by both sides, sanctions from different parties, economic power being distributed. I think we're right now just in the middle stages, or maybe even, although I hope not, in the early stages of what would be a longer experiment as to which types of these power will prove to be the most impactful in the long run.
We were told. What do you think will happen when?
Please don't ask me that question.
As Russia tries to initiate its own deployment of the power of international law in responding to this. So a lot of the discussion on the Ukrainian side has been mobilizing international law, international institutions. I mentioned some of those. There are obviously many other, the ICJ, the European Court of Human Rights, and so on. Russia's responded with its own plan for a Nuremberg-type tribunal, which of course has generated a lot of ridicule in the West. But what do you think the impact of that will be domestically and within Russian politics?
That's an interesting question, I think, because on the one hand, as you've said, there has been ridicule in the West. On the other hand, the Russians have been very dedicated to trying to set up their own justifications for why the war was happening. Zelensky was a Nazi. Ukraine was about to develop its own nuclear weapons. Claims that have no basis in fact, but nevertheless have a vast apparatus of structure around them. So I think this suggests that even if your legal arguments are not based on fact, you still value the fact that you've got a legal argument to buttress on, which I think is interesting and in some ways perhaps kind of surprising that you'd devote such resources to such fanciful theories, but perhaps that means that some people, at least enough people, believe them to make them worthwhile. But perhaps that feeds into a question for you, which is one of the interesting features of the Russia-Ukraine war has been the extent to which it's reverberated very differently in different parts of the world. And in the US and in especially Central and Eastern Europe, it's been seen as a case of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Zelensky's been treated as a hero, but in many other parts of the world, not so. It's been seen as a fight between two different powers or a US-Russia proxy struggle without any obvious moral import. And so to what extent do you think that will shape the international discussions over the legal ramifications of the war?
Yeah, I think this is why it's so important that any efforts towards accountability take into account these issues that I was mentioning about legitimacy. Because I think one of the key animating factors in precisely this situation, or the consequences you just described, is a feeling of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy with respect to the way that the West has approached questions of accountability for war crimes, but particularly questions of accountability for aggression. And of course, the invasion of Iraq in 2003 looms particularly large, but it's not the only example that people have in mind. And so to the extent any effort towards accountability for aggression is to be pursued, I think it's absolutely essential that states have the humility to understand that if they've been implicated in aggressive wars before, or if they're unwilling to take material steps towards ensuring the accountability for their own leaders for aggression going forward, they're going to undermine that process from the get-go precisely because of the way it will be received outside of their own bubble. And so that's why I think that's a critical thing to be taking into account in these next steps.
So now we move to remarks on behalf of the students. I would like now to invite Nani Detti to offer remarks on their behalf. Nani is a second-year Mould student. Before Fletcher, she interned for the Clooney Foundation for Justice and Centre for International Policy, and I understand she's still working very hard on that, if my sources are accurate. So Amal Clooney will play an important role at the General Assembly in a couple of weeks' time. She's been a student activist for Amnesty International. Nani founded Miss Sale Initiative, a civil society organization mentoring university students in Addis Ababa. Nani was born and grew up in Addis and went on to do her undergraduate studies at St. John's College and then the LSE. At Fletcher, Nani has been active on the Standing Committee on Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. She is the co-chair of the Fletcher Africana Club and is a member of the Student Council. Nani, please join us. The floor is yours.
Distinguished faculty, guests, and fellow students, it's an honor to be with you here today. I want to begin by congratulating incoming students on making one of the best decisions of your life so far, joining the Fletcher family. I want you to take this time to congratulate yourself on your accomplishment. Think about where you were a year ago today and where you are now. Your hard work and persistence have led you to join an institution that provides a rich academic experience, an opportunity to challenge yourself, and the skills you need to navigate a world that is growing more complex by the day. Like all of you, I decided to attend Fletcher in hopes that it would provide me with the knowledge and skills I need to move from a spectator to an actor. As an Ethiopian and an African, the social, political, and economic state of my country and continent kept me up at night. Why is the richest continent in the world home to the poorest people? What causes ethnic conflict and how do you resolve it? How do you build inclusive systems that lift people out of poverty and ensure a prosperous future for the youth? I came to Fletcher to gain a deeper clarity on these questions and many more, and I must say I have not been disappointed. The community you're joining today is a special one. It is not only a community of thinkers, but also doers. It is a community that will push you to get out of your comfort zone, broaden your perspectives on critical issues affecting the world, and one that will provide you with the support and mentorship you need to excel in your academic and professional life. Many of you might be feeling anxious about what lies ahead of you. Am I going to secure a spot in this class? Can I really survive the 8-hour exam that awaits me at the end of the semester? What should my field of study be? And what if I change my mind? All of these questions and many more are probably occupying your mind right now. As someone who was in the exact same position last year, I'm here to tell you that it will all be okay. And through time, with the help of your amazing faculty, staff, and peers, you will find your way at Fletcher. I want to take a few minutes today to share with you some valuable lessons that I have learned during my first year at Fletcher. The first is to meet and to get to know as many people as you can. During my first semester, I met with different faculty members and took time to ask questions about how to make the most out of my time here. I also met with second-year students to get advice on how to stay on top of demanding course load and how to overcome imposter syndrome. These conversations provided me with the assurance and guidance I needed to take on whatever challenges came my way during my time here. My second advice is to ask for help when you need it. Whatever it is, a 100-page reading that looks insurmountable, a problem set that is giving you a headache, or in my case, an existential crisis every now and then about what to do with my life, there's someone out there who's either in the same boat as you or who has overcome these challenges and can give you mentorship. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And when you find an opportunity to help others, do so. Learning doesn't begin and end in the classroom. So my third advice would be to get involved in your community and pursue opportunities that will allow you to link what you're learning in class with the real world. Fletcher offers a plethora of opportunities for you to hone your leadership skills and apply theory to practice. Fletcher's long list of student organization and annual student-led conferences are platforms for you to deepen your understanding of an issue you care about while giving back to your community in a meaningful way. As you take on extracurriculars and other projects in addition to your busy class schedule, I want to caution you against burning yourself out. Burnout is not a badge of honor, and I'm learning this the hard way. As you have heard from Dean Kite's introduction of me, I keep very busy. When I'm not in class or in meetings for my student leadership roles, I'm busy managing a nonprofit in Ethiopia from thousands of miles away. I have a demanding work schedule, and at times I have the unhealthy habit of taking on too much, even when I desperately need a break. This often leads me to feeling overwhelmed and stretching myself too thin, which impacts the quality of the work I put into my various commitments. A lesson that I'm forcing myself to learn is to stop glamorizing overworking and redefining my idea of productivity. Hard work is productive. So is having fun. So is resting. So is spending time with your friends and loved ones. And so is taking care of your mental health and your well-being. Always remember this. I want to end my speech by talking about the biggest challenge you'll face during your time at Fletcher and beyond. And this is how to continue caring about the world when the world is on fire. You're here because you care about the endless problems facing our world, be it climate change, conflict, food insecurity, or others. But the complexity and magnitude of these problems is making it increasingly difficult to stay optimistic about our future. I sometimes find myself feeling hopeless and defeated. Does my work matter? Can I really make a difference? What is the point of doing all this work if at the end of the day, the world is still a mess? These questions are difficult and are ones you will find asking the more you learn at Fletcher. Whenever I'm overwhelmed with these questions and I feel a little lost, what grounds me and helps me stay sane is going home. Because there, I find two parallel realities that help me keep a balanced view of the world I live in. I witness the poverty, insecurity, and crisis that are impacting my people, but I also witness their resilience and hard work. I witness the important work that local organizations are doing to build a better future for their country and themselves. So yes, there is pain and suffering, but there is also community, togetherness, and hope. And you should not lose sight of the latter as you're working to address the former. It is essential to be honest with yourself and understand the magnitude of the problems you have to solve as future leaders. But you shouldn't let the pain and suffering you see in the world simply consume you and paralyze you into inaction. So find ways to constantly remind yourself why your work matters. And if you find yourself stuck, go back and reread the essay that got you into Fletcher. I have no doubt that reflecting back on why you chose this path in the first place will serve you as a guide to continue doing the hard work needed to advance a just, peaceful, and sustainable world. As you begin your journey at Fletcher, I want to urge you to not lose your curiosity, to not lose your hope, and most importantly, to have fun. Thank you.
We'll get them later. Okay, Nanny, next time I get overwhelmed, I'm going to come look for you. Your resilience is our inspiration. Thank you. It's a privilege in the role of Dean to be able to present the next award. The Class of 1947 Memorial Award was established by the Class of 47 on its golden anniversary to honor a Fletcher graduate whose career has advanced in notable ways the Fletcher School's founding ideals and purposes. This award is given honoris causa, a mark of esteem. This year's recipient is indeed an esteemed alumnus of this school, Jeffrey Feltman, class of 1983. He has more than 40 years of international service as a US diplomat and senior UN civil servant promoting peace and security, mitigating conflict and protecting citizens. He has been on the front lines in his positions in situations that would often shock us on our television screens. He's worked in the middle of senseless wars and civil strife from Iran, Yemen, Lebanon, Haiti to Sudan, to name a few, and has helped with human rights and humanitarian assistance for victims, addressing famine, such as in the Horn of Africa. We've benefited from his efforts and impressions and the way in which he has helped leaders shape their paths for a road to peace. He has advocated for the unity of donors to post-conflict reconstruction efforts. Currently, he is the John C. Whitehead Visiting Fellow in International Diplomacy in the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution and a Senior Fellow at the UN Foundation. But since graduating from Fletcher with his mold, he has had two major chapters in his professional life, first as a US diplomat and then as a senior UN official. It's his 26-year career in the Foreign Service took him around the globe, supporting peace and diplomacy in many places. As a Foreign Service official, he focused largely on the Middle East and North Africa. From 2004 to 2008, he served as the US ambassador to Lebanon after having previously served in Erbil, Baghdad, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Tunis, Amman, Budapest, and Port-au-Prince. From 2009 to 12, he served as Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. In 2021, he returned to the US government and served as the first appointed US Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, where he worked to promote peace and stability in a critical region, focusing on Sudan and the conflict in northern Ethiopia. He's a two-time winner of the Presidential Service Award, as well as a recipient of many State Department awards. From the American Foreign Service Association, he received the Christian Herter Award for Constructive Dissent and the Sinclair Language Award. The second chapter of his career was international service as an international civil servant at the UN. He served as the Under-Secretary General for Political Affairs and traveled extensively as the Chief Foreign Policy Advisor to both Secretary Generals Ban Ki-moon and Antonio Guterres. During his tenure at the UN, he was chairperson of the UN's Counterterrorism Implementation Task Force and the Executive Director of the UN Counterterrorism Center. He oversaw UN mediation and conflict prevention work and also served as the UN's focal point on election assistance to approximately 50 countries annually. Today, in addition to his work at Brookings and the UN Foundation, he serves on several boards and advisory councils, including the Dialogue Advisory Group, the Berghoff Foundation, and the American Academy of Diplomacy. In recognition of these many contributions to a more peaceable world, I am pleased to present the Class of 47 Memorial Award to Jeffrey Feltman and invite him to provide comments. Jeffrey.
Dean Kite, thank you very, very much. And congratulations to the student and faculty members for their prizes. I think that Al Rubin, who was one of my professors, would be quite surprised to see me receiving a prize from Fletcher. Congratulations to all of you for the impact and the relevance that Fletcher has. It really is an honor for me to receive this award and to be asked to speak to you today. I welcome this opportunity to try to share how I applied Fletcher's commitment to service in the Fletcher education. As Dean Kite said, I do sort of divide my professional career into two chapters, and the US diplomat part and the international civil servant for the United Nations. And so based on that experience, I'd like to raise sort of three topics today with all of you and the opportunity that you've given me. First, I want to share sort of an on-the-ground diplomacy in action, diplomacy in practice anecdote, one from each of those two chapters, briefly. Second, I want to highlight at least what I found as the distinction between serving as a national diplomat, a US diplomat in my case, and serving the United Nations. I know others in this room have similar experiences, but I found the trade crafts to be much more different than I had anticipated when I went from the State Department to the United Nations. And then the third and last, I'm going to argue a bit that despite the renewed war in Europe, despite some of the question marks over international law that our distinguished professors mentioned stemming from the war in Ukraine, that the sort of the legacy institutions that we've inherited, like the United Nations, remain essential. So first, the anecdotes, and these are typical diplomatic war stories, literally. First, the stated priority for any U.S. embassy is the protection of U.S. citizens. Now, usually that means doing things like replacing lost passports. It's not the high-profile stuff. It's not the stuff that people dream about when they say, I want to go into the Foreign Service, but it's what's supposed to be the #1 priority of any U.S. embassy. But when I was U.S. ambassador to Lebanon, I saw what a high-profile protection challenge might be. In the summer of 2006, Lebanon, after years of civil war, assassinations, et cetera, finally seemed to be at peace. Lebanese Americans brought their children and dropped them off with their grandparents in home villages to spend the summer. Arab tourists from, shall we say, more puritanical parts of the Arab world were filling Beirut's hotels, nightclubs, restaurants once again. It was a festive scene. And then in July 2006, Hezbollah, in a very complicated raid, crossed the border to Israel, kidnapped and killed Israeli soldiers. Israel retaliated immediately. Lebanon went from peace to war literally overnight. And that gave those of us at the embassy no opportunity to give American citizens advance warning. Get out while the airport's still open. Get out before the ports are blockaded. So we were a small embassy, suddenly with a huge responsibility. Thousands of trapped Americans, including, by the way, the late food critic Anthony Bourdain, came to the embassy demanding evacuation help. There was no other way to get out. The worst period in my career were those excruciatingly long first 4 days of the 2006 Hezbollah-Israel war, as we struggled to assemble means of evacuation and witnessing terrified Lebanese staff at the embassy and Lebanese friends. Now, by the 5th day, working with the US military, we had cobbled together a system of ships and helicopters. Over the next 10 days, in an active war zone, we evacuated over 15,000 Americans in an orderly fashion, I'm proud to say, plus citizens of partner countries like Canada. Those worst initial 4 days evolved into what was probably the most significant achievement of my Foreign Service career in terms of actually touching Americans. You can imagine the sense of relief at the embassy we had when the last Americans who had asked for our help sailed to Cyprus. Not the stuff you read about or think about when you join the Foreign Service, but it was really, really important to those people that we helped. My second anecdote dates from 2017. North Korea had launched its 6th nuclear test, defying what was then a unified Security Council. President Trump and DPRK leader Kim Jong-un were escalating colorful but increasingly bellicose insults. North Korea's ICBM launch that year demonstrated that probably all of continental United States was within the range of North Korean weaponry. Nuclear war felt frighteningly close by late 2017. By then, I had been at the United Nations for over 5 years. And at the General Assembly that year, North Korean Foreign Minister, also Central Committee member, Ri Yong-ho, pulled me aside with an invitation to come to have a UN political dialogue in Pyongyang. Now, what to do? Moscow, Beijing, and Seoul, members of the moribund 6-party talks dealing with North Korea's nuclear power, urged me to accept, given the tensions. American and Japanese officials were adamantly opposed, saying that if I visited, I would puncture the pressure campaign they were leading, and I would be instrumentalized. My expectations of what I might achieve in this period were pretty low, but I felt very uncomfortable saying no to the invitation. North Korea's nuclear program was and is a significant threat to international peace and security. And I was working for the UN that was designed to maintain international peace and security. So I did what I'd learned as a good bureaucrat I could do. I simply stalled. A few weeks later, my then boss, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, met with President Trump at the Oval Office, and obviously, given the atmosphere, North Korea was on the agenda. President Trump's words stunned his aides, the very aides who had objected to my visit. He said, Jeff should go to Pyongyang And Jeff should tell them I'm ready to meet their leader. So I went. And during my 5 days in North Korea, I did not meet Kim Jong-un, but I did see privately a very high-level private advisor, a close advisor, to pass the American message upward. That was early December 2017. Kim Jong-un's January 2018 New Year's address a couple weeks later offered to reopen military and diplomatic channels with Seoul. These were steps that we during the UN trip had urged as a way to manage potential incidents, convey intentions, prevent an accidental war. His language was still tough regarding Washington at the time, but his speech seemed to signal that imminent threat of war was receding. To this day, I do not know whether my trip and the message that I was asked to pass was influential or not. But if I did contribute to an off-ramp from a potential nuclear crisis, that would certainly be the proudest moment of my career. Now, my second topic, that contrast that at least I experienced between serving as a US diplomat and working in an international institution. Things that are probably open to all of you to work for your national government or work for an international institution. After my swearing in as UN Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, Ban Ki-moon, then the Secretary General, to put the job in context, said to me, Jeff, I actually said Mr. Feltman, he's very formal. Mr. Feltman, you are like the Secretary of State for the United Nations. Now that was a very flattering pretension, given the discrepancies in staff size, in budget, in authorities, in profile between the two departments. I mean, I knew I was not like the Secretary of State, but I did not grasp just how different the skills one needs in the United Nations are from the ones that I had practiced for 26 years as a US diplomat. A US diplomat carries that so-called invisible knapsack, that contains those elements of US hard power. The American military might, the power of the dollar, the veto power in the Security Council, the voting weight in the Bretton Woods institutions, influence of the White House, the list goes on. This is tangible stuff. And US diplomats obviously seek to build alliances and partnerships on behalf of US interests. But US diplomats also know that at the end of the day, if the US decides to go alone, the US probably can go alone. Whether we should is a question for a different speech. And in contrast, when I opened my UN backpack, my new UN backpack, what did I see? I saw the principles and the ideals of the Charter. I had the soaring rhetoric, the ideals of the conventions like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I was proud, I was really proud to represent those values. But those tools are intangible compared to what I was used to. To have impact, I needed to forge as wide a consensus as possible, both inside the UN machinery and with enough member states to give me leverage. The bottom line is US diplomats hope for consensus. UN officials must build consensus. And there's also an issue on prevention. We talked a little bit about this at lunch today, over lunch today. The irreducible purpose of the United Nations, of course, is conflict prevention, to prevent succeeding generations from the scourge of war, as the UN preamble, as the preamble to the UN Charter has it. That requires the UN to be able to detect early warning signs. Now, every US embassy reports to Washington on local political developments. That's what embassies do. Host countries accept that. Host countries' embassies do the same thing. That's normal diplomatic practice. But UN member states do not want to see UN officials reporting on domestic political events in their countries. Development and humanitarian work, that's fine. Political work, forget it. Meaning that in order to try to work on conflict prevention, my staff in the UN Department of Political Affairs had to be really creative in how you develop partnerships, sources of information, et cetera, to be able to detect early warning. When you see the UN doing political statements, it's usually because a crisis has already happened. The Syria envoy reporting to the Security Council, the Yemen envoy reporting to the Security Council. What we were trying to do was prevent crises, but I found that gathering information on early warning was far more difficult as a UN official than it had been as a US official. Now, in both parts of my career, in both chapters, as Dean Kite called them, I was blessed to have impressive colleagues, and an astonishing number of them came from this institution. But at the UN, when I gathered my staff to talk about the world's problems, the world was represented at that table. One of my advisors was a child soldier who had fought the Portuguese colonialists in his native Mozambique. Another worked on independence on her native country of Timor-Leste. You know, no matter how smart and diverse the people are around the interagency meetings in Washington, Washington does not offer the mind-expanding breadth of perspectives that I heard during the 6 years I was at the United Nations. Now, my last topic. What should we think today of those legacy institutions like the United Nations? And I'm not an academic, and I'm not an expert in international law, so I'm just speaking more as a practitioner. Diplomats of my generation tend to view the immediate post-Cold War era as the norm. That was our experience. That was what we professionally grew up with. And then the United Nations was engaged in successful peace processes in Africa, in Asia, in Central America. And despite some catastrophic failures, Rwanda and Srebrenica, most notably, this could be called sort of a golden age of peacekeeping, particularly compared to now, when UN envoys are struggling to end conflicts in Syria, in Yemen, in South Sudan, and elsewhere. But that earlier peacemaking period coincided with the more or less unipolar world after the end of the Cold War, a temporary period when the US largely directed the agenda, when China had not yet flexed its muscles, when post-Soviet Russia was looking inward. That unipolar moment is over. And institutions like the United Nations are torn more than ever between the principles behind the organization, the principles in the charter, and the interests of assertive member states. And assertive member states are not confined just to the great powers. And as we see in Syria, Libya, and elsewhere, proxy wars are back. But we can, I believe, draw lessons from the Cold War, not a unipolar period and a period marked by proxy wars. The architects of today's multilateralism, the multilateralism that we've inherited, created a system that's sometimes called layered multilateralism. Different institutions with varied memberships that serve distinct functions. You know, the United Nations, the Bretton Woods institutions, NATO, OSCE, the EU integration that became the European Union. While distinct, these organizations essentially worked in tandem as sort of a layered multilateralism. And yes, one that was very much in the US interest. As an American, I will say that. Now, the world has changed, but the idea of distinct organizations with different memberships and mandates, but acting in complementarity, to me, seems to remain appropriate. Existing organizations are evolving to become less Western-centric. Non-state actors are increasingly involved. Multilateralism today cannot be confined to governments only if we're to address the reality of migration, economic inequities, or the climate crisis and environmental degradation, or pandemics. Now, inside the UN, facing disappointments, facing problems, we often reassured ourselves with the fact that since the UN's creation, there had never been a repetition of direct, devastating war between the great powers. Now, Russia's unprovoked war on Ukraine brings us uncomfortably close. Now, some will hope that this crisis will inspire a serious overhaul of the international multilateralism architecture, just as happened after World War I and World War II. Count me as a skeptic. 49 governments unified by the shared experience of 2 world wars were in San Francisco, along with Dean Stewart, to finalize the UN Charter. The UN's current membership of 193 member states is deeply divided in multiple directions. And do we really think today's global leadership has the quality and vision of the leadership of the World War II generation? But at least until now, as Dean Kite and I were talking about earlier, the UN has demonstrated more resilience in the face of Russia's war in Ukraine than I had expected when Russia invaded Ukraine. The Security Council, yes, it's paralyzed regarding Ukraine, but other mandates are renewed by the Security Council. The UN worked with creativity, and really unusual coherence with the Turks on the Ukraine-Russian deal on grain exports. Other parts of the system continue to function. This is not analogous to the League of Nations in the 1930s, at least not yet. At the same time, I do not believe that the United Nations will heroically broker a Ukraine-Russia peace deal. But at some point, this war too shall end. And when it does, we're likely to need the UN to use its unique authority to give universal legitimacy with the force of international law to whatever the understandings are that are worked out. And who knows what functions the United Nations, for lack of other alternatives, might be asked to play. And as an example, I remember when the Colombian government and the FARC guerrillas, after years of rejecting any role for the United Nations in their peace talks, approached the UN for support. I found myself in the most unusual situation of negotiating the parameters of a UN mandate with one of my Fletcher classmates, then President of Colombia and future Nobel laureate, Juan Manuel Santos. He was a better student than I was, too, I have to say. And the point is not only the fabled importance of the Fletcher connections, which are real, but the need to preserve institutions like the United Nations, even if at times they seem to be on standby, waiting for the moment when they prove essential. The bottom line, in my view, is that in today's world, the UN, warts and all, does seem irreplaceable, given the realities of global polarization and so forth. Yes, let's tinker with the multilateral machinery in hopes of improving it. I would argue, let's push back against some Chinese attempts to replace the universal values operating system of the UN with Chinese software. And let's add some new alliances to that layered multilateralism I mentioned that go beyond just governments to address gaps in the current system. But let's not pretend that we can create a new universal body with similar authorities, or that we'd be better off without the UN. For those of us who are American, we should see the UN as potential home turf, and let's not stomp off the playing field and give the opposing team a default victory at a time when more than ever, we need to be strengthening our partnerships and alliances. I entered Fletcher 41 years ago. It's hard for me to believe that it was 41 years that I was sitting in these seats. And this is one room that actually existed 41 years ago. And as I've hinted, I was not a star student, as you could ask any of the emeriti faculty who are still around if they remember me at all. But Fletcher gave me the skills, the confidence, the context, and the connections to move forward with what was for me a most rewarding career of public service in an evolving world. It is exciting to see all of you and imagine the contributions that you're going to make to global peace, to sustainable development, to all in a context, in a global context that's far more complex than that binary Cold War environment in which I started my professional career. This is my opportunity to say thank you to Fletcher for giving me the skills that allowed me to have the type of career that I didn't, and to make the contributions that I hope I was able to do. So thank you to Fletcher. Thanks to Dean Kite for selecting me for this honor this year, and my best wishes to all of you for the careers that await you.
Wow, well, thank you so much for breathing life and color into your anecdotes and into the frontline experience of that kind of career of international public service. And thank you for sort of centering us at the beginning of this academic year and the contributions that I know you all aspire to make. Coming after Nani's sort of centering again around not getting overwhelmed, I think it was a very powerful afternoon. That concludes our convocation ceremony. A little housekeeping. Please allow the platform party and the faculty in all of their glory to leave the auditorium and then join us for a reception on the mezzanine and in the Hall of Flags. A lot of people did a lot of work to make today happen. You all know who you are. There are too many to mention, but thank you very much. And the administration of the school is led by the indomitable Dean Maribel Blanco, and I'm grateful for her leadership. Thank you. And as the fabulous Fletcher faculty process out at the bow of the ship, will be the one and only Dean Kelly Sims Gallagher. And without her academic stewardship, we wouldn't be where we are today. So thank you very much. I'm going to want to see you strut up those stairs now, you know. Now, go well and safely in the world. Let us enjoy this community, ensure that it is a community that continues to sustain us and sustain the world. The great 20th century Jewish theologian and philosopher Abraham Heschel said that it is gratefulness that makes the soul great. We're looking out at all of you today, listening to our revered alum. I feel like my soul is a little stronger. I hope yours is too. And we will go on and make the world a better place. Thank you very much.